I think media and social media can be used for higher brain purposes, which is educating and connecting people and getting you informed about what some of the cool things that are happening in the community and drawing your attention to things that are, you were recently in a charity event, right? I mean, drawing attention to wonderful things like that. So I'm not against any technology, but I think we have to be very aware of whether it's used for a higher brain purpose or a lower brain purpose. And if it's making you go lower brain, create some separation.
This is Sparta! Welcome back to Spartan Leadership. I'm your host, Josh Kosnick, and we are in for a treat today. We got my good friend, Dr. Niraj Nijhawan. And this is his second time back, and we were just talking about it. It's been 3 years since we were behind the microphones together before. Why I say this is such a special treat is in our previous podcast, Inspire People, Impact Lives, which you can go back and listen to all those episodes. He was our most downloaded episode. I don't even think I told you that.
No.
Maybe it's because I listened to it so many times as well, but it was our most downloaded episode because Dr. Raj is so full of wisdom, and we had such a great conversation. So let me tell you a little bit about him. For those that didn't hear that episode and are hearing this and getting introduced to Raj for the first time, you're going to hear an absolute powerhouse of information. This is a person that has blazed a trail in the medical world and has continued to blaze that trail in a very unique way through his own entrepreneurial path. So he's the founder and CEO of Leo Project, and we'll talk a lot about that today. He's a practicing physician anesthesiologist by trade, author of Human 3.0, and a leader in sustainable happiness, which we'll get into a lot today as well. So welcome back.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it. Nice intro.
Yeah.
That's kind of you.
Well, it's all true. So we get to wrap again today.
Yeah.
And I was, like I said, I was listening to our episode because I wanted to give people new information. Obviously, it's been 3 years, so I know that you and I have both grown. We rebranded the episode or the podcast to Spartan Leadership, and we're talking through leader-to-leader tasks. One of the things that stood out for me, and I gave you a glowing intro because it is all true, but I was thinking back to something you said in our previous episode, which was you didn't start here being this, genius of the upper brain, creating programs, being an anesthesiologist, all this stuff. In your early life career, you admitted to being a narcissist, insecure, and many other adjectives that weren't great.
Yeah.
So I thought we'd be like, so we're going to get into some genius stuff, and you guys are going to see the genius that is Dr. Raj. But I thought we should start with where you started and what came to be now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting story. I was one of these kids who was, pretty good in sports and school, and I skipped a couple of years of school, in fact, and started med school when I was pretty young, 20. But back then, 30 years ago, med school was more of a dramatic transition. Second year to third year med school is books, which I was great at, to people, which it turns out I was horrible at. Life and people, I didn't have a clue. It was because I was young, but I also had a lot of, I think, psychological issues that you mentioned. And so I actually had to take a year off of med school to figure out whether I could even continue. I went from being top of the class type of performance to bottom of the class and didn't know what was happening. But all those things came out of the closet: anxiety, anger issues, insecurity, sociopathy. I was very emotionally shut down. And I joke that luckily my wife of 33 years showed up, and she's conveniently a psychotherapist. So it's like, the universe basically saved me and brought her into my life. She stabilized me in many ways and held me accountable for how I was as a human being. A lot of times not good. And then another dear friend of mine, Scott Streckenbach, who's a practicing physician at Harvard. Actually, he was a year ahead of me in med school. It's like a big brother to me. And he helped me to fall in love with self-help literature that you and I we love self-help self-help literature. And so the combination of that medical background, a science background, passion for self-help, a need for it because I was struggling, really is what led to 30 plus years of gathering tools to help me. And then, like, lo and behold, hey, maybe we can package these together and see if these different configurations help other people. And it's like, boom, all kinds of really cool things started happening in the last 10 years.
So you meet your wife, obviously the other doctor at Harvard helped you out. Was there a book or a series of books or a series of instances or experiences that started helping you go from this narcissistic, arrogant, insecure person to the person that I know and love today?
I appreciate that. I feel the same. I mean, it's funny that you asked that, and we haven't prepared for this at all. I was just going to let's let it rip, so it's kind of fun to reminisce. So Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People was a big impact on me. In fact, I remember reading a part where I was like, man, I'm actually really egotistical, because as I was reading this description, I'm like, that's me. Like, I'm pretty egotistical. Well, it took me another 20 years to figure out how to overcome that. But Road Less Traveled was great. Scott Peck. Brian Tracy's work. So Brian Tracy was a big motivational speaker and thinker. And I his stuff, I really got into, time management material that helped me to really, sometimes it almost became an addiction for me. I was too fanatical about time and kind of ran over people who were interfering with my time, my family especially, unfortunately. So I think that helped me as well. So those are some of the big ones in the beginning. Yeah.
Cool. Those are great. Pretty much all of what you have said, I've read as well. Yeah. I think Brian Tracy's The Flight Plan was my favorite of his works. It's just a great analogy that went with that book and that story. So 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is one of the top 10 books, I think, of all time.
Yeah.
There's the simple 7 principles in there, and then obviously the explanations and the why behind them are so great. So for anyone that has not read that book yet, that is a must read. And in pretty much anyone, whether you hear from Warren Buffett or any of the big names out there, that book is going to appear on their list. So don't just take it from Raj and I. Yeah. So a little bit about that why. So for those that heard my intro or were paying attention during the intro, Raj is a practicing anesthesiologist. But over the last, was it about 20 years that you fell in love with neuroscience?
I'd say it's even 30 years because, again, just reaching out in all directions for ideas for how to become better as a human being. Okay. And you could say neuroscience, in a sense, really took off, about 30 years ago, because that's when functional MRI came along. And so once we could look inside the brain and see it in real time with PET scans and MRI, we could see what parts of the brain lit up during what conditions and what functions, and the before and the after. We started to get a lot more. I think that's really sort of when neuroscience really took off. There's other forms of neuroscience, social psychology, evolutionary biology, that were there before that and gave us a lot of insight into the human condition. But that's when it really took off, I feel.
I remember asking you that last time, why brain science was just over the last 30 years. So that then you mentioned those 2 technologies were the big precipice.
Hopefully my answer was this.
It was the exact same. So we're on point. So the why behind this. So keep this in perspective, everyone. He's a practicing physician, full-time physician at a hospital, anesthesiologist, high stress job, and you've devoted your extra time, if there is that, to neuroscience and creating the Leo Project. Yeah. What's your motivation?
It's just, first of all, I get restless really fast. I get bored really fast. So I knew I had to have a kind of big creative project to work on. I had experienced some incredible changes as a human being. And so I was like, what can we do to help others? So how can we be creative in putting different configurations together of what we call brain hacks? So what are the different tools? The next evolution in my mind is there's a lot of discoveries that are out there, but it's overwhelming almost. I think I can imagine for a person who isn't in healthcare or has a science background, you see all the information that's out there and like, I don't even know where to start, just forget about it. So I think the next evolution in our evolution as human beings is how do we take some of these discoveries and put them together in a cohesive way so that you can sort of hold on to all these tools and act on all these tools almost simultaneously to get even another boost in your functioning as a human being. And so that was the big idea, was how do you aggregate these ideas, these tools, and then how do you iterate? So, to use the Silicon Valley notion of agile and iteration and being bold and innovating and testing and tossing out things that don't work, fail fast. We brought that to bear also into our methodology. So we brought a clinical science kind of approach to it, but also an aggregation approach and an agile approach. And I think that's where 400 or 500 workshops later, we've had some remarkable impact. So I think it stemmed from this next logical idea, like, here's all these things that I've learned and have impacted me. Let's see if we can help you, incorporate a whole bunch of them at the same time, rather than just one technique, meditation technique or a breathing technique or diet, or what happens if we bring a bunch of them at the same time and give you a real jolt to your system and your brain and your body.
So, in your opinion, where does someone start? Because you just mentioned a few different things, right? And aggregating them together. Yeah. So let's say I've never heard of the Leo Project. I'm an anxious, maybe clinically depressed person, and I'm just kind of lost in life.
Yeah, no,
Where do I start?
And I think that's true for a lot of people. I think one of the brain hacks that we have is self-compassion, that I think you have to recognize. One of the discoveries that we have in brain science is, and in a way you didn't need brain science to know this, like if you imagine when you first drive a car, we first learned to drive a car, how complicated it is, how overwhelming it is, especially if you're trying to teach your kid to do it. It's like so stressful. Everyone's yelling at everybody. Right? I remember that experience myself.
That's why my mom taught me instead of my dad. Right. It just was not a good combination.
Right, on both ends. I remember the stress of it. But then you flash forward and you can drive 100 miles, door to door somewhere, and you don't remember any of it. That's like miraculous, the level of complexity that goes subconscious. And that's the same for biking and language. And these are so sophisticated. But imagine, we're all traumatized to some extent. I mean, we're all imperfect human beings taking care of, trying to raise kids. Then we create imperfect human beings. So you get traumatized in different ways, from neglect, from abuse, from what have you.
Tragic death. I mean, injuries.
Random little episodes that happen in your life where someone picks on you. And so what ends up happening is that same AI that's so powerful at, learning language and driving and walking, like normal AI, traditional AI hasn't been able to even replicate those yet. That's how sophisticated we are. Well, that same sophisticated system can trap really adaptive behaviors that you take on to protect yourself. So I think, first of all, it's important to really be compassionate to yourself. We all have what we call lower brain. So one of the constructs that we talk about is this battle going on between higher brain and lower brain, 5 networks against 5 networks, almost like a basketball game, right? and you have the ability, whether if you're higher brain dominant, it predicts almost everything that's important to you in life. If you're lower brain dominant, it predicts almost everything that's bad that can happen in your life. And so it's really important to know that you have the ability, because of a concept that we can hit on later, neuroplasticity, you have the ability to become as higher brain dominant as you want. So first of all, there's hope for people as a foundation. Second of all, compassion. Like, don't be hard on yourself. Almost everyone is lower brain through a random series of events in your life. And so paradoxically, if you accept yourself for your warts and all, your flaws, you have a better chance of actually stepping outside of that part of your brain. So I think it starts with a foundation of belief and hope that you can become higher brain dominant.
Self-acceptance.
Self-acceptance is huge. And now let's start becoming a scientist of ourselves. What causes us to go lower brain? What causes us to go higher brain? If we go lower brain, what can we do to pull out of it? How can we stay anchored in the higher brain? And I think that's the good architecture of a program for helping yourself become better and better as a human being.
That's really awesome. Let's stay with that basketball analogy. So if I'm reading you right, the lower brain is always on offense. And then the upper brain is our defensive strategy.
To some extent, I think that analogy works, and it can also flip-flop. So I think in a way, the lower brain, from an evolutionary perspective, almost everyone knows about fight or flight. And when I ask people, why is it there? And they say survival, it turns out that's not quite the right answer. The real answer is survival of the genes. It's obsessed with passing your genes on to the next generation. And so in some ways, and it's
that's a really primal thought, by the way.
So therefore, it's obsessed with our status and it's obsessed with opportunity. The paradox is you have less status and less opportunity the more obsessed you are with it. It's a Zen paradox. And we'll talk about that when the higher brain goes on offense, actually, to use your analogy. So sometimes you're right. The lower brain is on offense because it's trying to get things, get status, and get opportunity. But then it's on defense when it thinks there's a threat to losing or failing. It sabotages all risk-taking. And that's where it becomes a defensive creature that really harms you and disengages you from life because, it's worried about you looking stupid or failing or being rejected. And so then it starts to sabotage the risk-taking that you should take, where you should try new things and you should measure whether they work or don't work, or assess whether they work or don't work, whether it's, difficult conversations skills or leadership or parenting or being entrepreneurial and being innovative. Like all these things are skills that you can work on, but you've got to get bumped and bruised by life in order to really advance as a human being, advance in your relationships, advance in the products and services that you may want to create, or an idea system that you want to create. You've got to take a lot of risk. And that's where the lower brain becomes on defense. It's like, no, don't go there. It's problematic. And it's what's scary is there's Nobel Prize winning studies, especially by Kahneman and Tversky, to show that loss avoidance is our prime motivator. It's not gain. It's 3-to-1 loss avoidance. And so you've got to crack the code of that system, or you are living a life that's 50, 60, 70% less than what you could live. I'm not focused on making a lot of money. If that's your game, that's totally cool. I don't have a problem with that. And not even moving up the rank of your organization or society. To me, it's about being fearless at creating something beautiful, whether that's a relationship or that's you and growing.
Or a business.
Yeah, absolutely. To me, building something is beautiful. And so how bold can you be in being all in on creating something beautiful?
Yeah.
And I think everyone can do that. And we need to help them to get their lower brain out of the way, where higher brain is on offense. It can be on defense in the sense that it's like, hey, don't be too aggressive or too crazy, and don't be too attached to the outcome. That's for higher brain.
So it's a true game. It's not just that one's offense and one's defense.
Yeah.
It's a true roles. Back and forth.
They can flip roles for sure.
That's fun. That's fun to think about. It's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And for people to think about so the trick is then recognizing when one is playing defense in a bad way, when one is playing offense in a bad way.
Yes.
So that you can course correct.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great point.
Okay, let's go back to that loss avoidance thing. So we are a lot of business owners, entrepreneurs, top-end salespeople, high-driven people will listen to this show. Loss avoidance, 3-to-1. So let's talk directly to those people right now. We're talking to entrepreneurs. We're talking to people that are scared to take that leap, whether it's to leave their job to follow their dream, whether it's to expand their business, whether it's to ask that their life partner to marry them, whatever it might be. Let's talk directly to those people and how do we overcome that loss avoidance to go and take that risk because you say it's so needed.
Yeah, I mean, because one of the sort of questions that we force successful, wealthy people, we force them with an uncomfortable question, which is, what is your definition of maximum happiness? And for me, the formula, and this is based on neuroscience, it's based on the neurochemicals of happiness. Maximum happiness is not just external success and wealth. To me, you want to have that, and you want to have as little stress as possible, and you want to have as much creative fearlessness as possible, meaning you keep pushing yourself to keep making discoveries and trying new things. And then the problem with people who are successful and wealthy, it becomes very easy to keep going to the same well of dopamine, which is you keep going to the well of validation for your success and pleasure, external pleasure to get the dopamine. dopamine. And the problem is it doesn't mathematically, it's inferior, because the higher brain happiness, which includes dopamine is just a novelty neurochemical, which says if you have a novel experience, you get some dopamine. Well, you can have way more dopamine produced by higher brain novelty of creativity. So if you get stuck in this trap, and it happens to a lot of successful and wealthy people, where they get really good at something and they've made a lot of money, and then they lose that ability to tolerate the bumps and bruises and the dopamine drop that happens when you try something new, you go in a new direction, you're more vulnerable in a relationship, you working on emotional intimacy, things that you're not as used to doing are very scary. You get so hooked on this dopamine that's coming in from the outside all the time that you lose the ability to tolerate the drop in dopamine from failing or being rejected is so great that the pain feels too great. That's where the lower brain goes on defense. Lower brain says, are you crazy? Like, what are you thinking about doing here? Everything's great here. Yeah. We got dopamine coming in, a nice steady stream. Problem is, we get bored.
So that's the comfort zone then, right?
It's the comfort zone.
So you've entered, you're successful, or you're in a spot of comfortability.
Yes.
And that's where your lower brain is saying, no.
We're good.
Stay right there.
But if you actually measured from moment to moment to moment, how much actual happiness neurochemicals you're producing, including all the higher brain ones, things like GABA and serotonin and norepinephrine, anandamide, IL-10, the alphabet soup, doesn't matter. Higher brain happiness of being creatively fearless is far superior. But if you're hooked on external dopamine because you've done really well, what happens from moment to moment is you're pretty bored, actually. You're bored. That leads to depression. That leads to addiction because you're playing it safe.
And your brain's looking for other chemicals then if you're going towards addiction of something else.
Yeah. It's saying, listen, this is, okay, well, fine. We're making a bunch of money and we're at the top of the, the hierarchy, and okay, but we're bored. You get to that state where you're bored. But then the problem is you have enough neurochemicals of happiness coming in, mostly dopamine from the outside, that you're like, I'm content. That's a trick that the lower brain likes to tell is, yeah, we're content. We're happy. We don't need more. But in fact, if you measured from moment to moment to moment, your happiness that you're producing is very much less than it could be. So to me, max happiness equals success plus creative fearlessness divided by stress levels. So if you're successful, but you're using the stress system to drive you, higher stress plus success means that's not maximum happiness. You're burning a hole in your stomach and your heart and your brain at the same time, and damaging relationships, and you're impulsive and reactive and just crabby. That doesn't seem success to me. To me, max happiness is the definition of success, which is you can have the career success piece or the monetary success. But even more important, this is why anybody has access to this. Are you creatively fearless? And are you able to eliminate stress? Are you able to stay higher brain? And are you able to shut off the lower brain? Now you're cooking, on all cylinders all the time. That's where all human beings can get to. But this lower brain is a savvy creature.
Yeah. I actually, as you were talking there, we could stay on this topic all day, so we'll move on after this. But I was thinking about this as I've coached so many business owners and advisors throughout my career. I've often joked that we can handle about, say, 10 to 12 things on our plate at any given time. Big things. And we like that amount of pressure. And if one more gets on our plate, we have to remove one. If one falls off our plate, we pick a fight with our wife to maintain that harmonious balance of, at least in our head. So I wonder if that's something like what you're talking about there is like there's a certain amount of handling or pressure or stress that any which one a high entrepreneur can take. But that's not the upper brain talking. That's the lower brain talking.
It depends on the story you're telling. That's what's so profound. And that's a part of the brain that we talk about, the orbital prefrontal cortex, is the storytelling machinery of your brain. If you're telling a story of, I want to be successful because, I want to feel good about myself. I want people to validate me. it's not sustainable. The problem is
the why is not strong enough.
Well, and you get burned out because when there's a threat to that, stress levels go up.
Yes.
And if there's a threat to not getting it, we sabotage certain risk taking. This is what we talked about before. The dopamine drop is too great. So creative fearlessness comes off the table. And so, but, as restless creatures, most people who are entrepreneurial are a little bit restless and a little bit crazy. I put myself in that category. We do need a certain amount of stimulation, but is the stimulation, like you said, the why? Is it being motivated by something sustainable, which is, I just want to be creatively excited, and I want to build things and create things and just, I'm having fun, that to me is sustainable. If you're doing it for identity, or you're doing it for validation, or you're doing it for security, or you're doing it for pleasure, that's not sustainable. Yeah. And then the stress goes up and the risk taking goes down, and you keep going to the same well of what you're good at doing. And then you get a little bit restless and you start, picking fights and, but if you could be fearless creatively, you're stimulated. Yeah. And then you don't need to, get into squabbles with people because you're fulfilled.
Yes, that's good. All right. So 3 years ago, we were talking different studio, but we were talking about anxiety and fear. And you said in 2019 that anxiety and fear in America had never been higher. Now, put that in perspective, everyone. That was 2019. Obviously, think about the last 2 years that we've gone through with the COVID shutdowns and government and politics and geopolitical stuff, all the different stuff we've been put through over the last couple of years. I'm almost scared to ask this question. Where are we now?
Yeah, it's crazy and heartbreaking. It's how much struggle, especially we as Americans, and as time allows, we can talk about why we as Americans are particularly vulnerable to some of these brain dynamics, but also have the answers in our backyard to these problems. I think the head of the APA, American Psychological Association, said that 9 in 10 people now struggle with depression or anxiety. Back then, it was probably 40 to 50% had depression or anxiety.
Now, that doesn't mean they're clinically diagnosed with depression, but they have some bouts and they struggle with.
That's a really good point. Is, I don't know if he was referring to clinical, and it's on a continuum, right? I think sometimes clinical depression or anxiety is probably a little bit of a kind of, I know it's defined the DSM. I think they're up to the DSM-6, whatever the psychiatrists use their Bible of diagnostic criteria. So yeah, you're right. It may not be clinical, but it's on a continuum. Right. So even if you're not clinically depressed or anxious, you're still having a lot of fallout from being relatively lower brain. I like to use the analogy that we're somewhere from a 0 to 100 in terms of, if you're 100, you're totally higher brain. If you're 0, you're totally lower brain, meaning you're very narcissistic and very hedonistic, and you're completely avoidant of accountability and pain, and you're just really in a bad place. You're sociopathic. That's 0. 100 is, you're just, really self-transcendent, basically. So I think as you move further and further towards lower brain, maybe let's say 20 is clinical depression, anxiety, but you're at a 30. That's still causing a lot of problems. It's causing problems with energy. It's causing problems with poor eating habits. It's causing problems with sleep. It's causing problems with disease. It's causing, emotional suffering. So there's still a lot of bad things happening, even though you're not clinically depressed or anxious. So it is a major crisis right now as Americans. The mental health crisis is truly catastrophic and huge. But the good news is, we've got some really good evidence that at scale with any group that we've worked with, 50 to 100 people, sometimes 300 people, rapid transformation can happen. A vast majority of a group can go higher brain over a period of, this is our intervention, our program, LEO program is a 12-hour program to think in terms of clinical science terminology. That's the intervention. And it's distributed over 3 to 6 months. And you're seeing 40, 50, 60% drops in everything. Anxiety, depression, sleep problems, eating problems, energy problems. Everything's getting better, which means people are really good at shutting off the lower brain when you give them the tools to do it. So this is sort of a scary story and a very hopeful story at the same time from our perspective, based on what we've experienced in the last 4 or 5 years of doing this intervention with lots of different entities.
Oh, that's cool. And so for the audience as well, as Dr. Raj has previously been in a lot of companies, and over the last couple of years really worked with a lot of school districts here in Wisconsin. Any other states?
Ohio, we've got a couple of things potentially cooking in Ohio, and we're school-wise, we're starting to start. Yeah.
But I think that's so important because you're working with teachers who are working with our future youth.
Yes.
Right. So
we're so excited about our schoolwork. It's really serendipity that we got pulled into the school world, and it's been really booming. And I love teachers. I love school leaders, school staff. I think they're kind. They're really heart-centric. I think they've gotten a really bad rap because of the whole confusion about mask, not mask. I get it. I get why parents are really frustrated. They're worried about their kids, losing school time. They're having mental health issues by virtue of not being in their community. It's such a terrible position that we were in. So my heart goes out to everybody. But teachers usually, I think they get the raw end of the deal and being blamed for some of the crisis that's happening for families and their kids not being in school. And I get it. I understand both sides.
They're following instructions at the end of the day, and it was mandated by the states. So
it's so everyone's making it up as they go along. So I understand all sides of the controversy and the struggle. But, teachers and school leaders are very kind people. You're not going into that industry to make a lot of money, or be really famous. And what we found about them is they are very intelligent, no surprise. They're very humble and open to new ideas, and they're very heart-centric. They're very committed to their community. And it's gone boom. We've up to 8 or 9 school systems now in the last year. And the results have been really powerful in terms of transformation in mental health and psychological safety, something else we measure, which is a sign that the community is going more higher brain. And then we've got evidence that it works for the kids too. So,
and when you say community, you're talking about let's say, for lack of better words, the organism of the school district.
Yes.
So not the entire city, but the community that you're affecting.
That's a really good clarification. That school community, all school staff. So again, superintendents and principals have been very wise in saying, let's have everybody go through this understanding. So we as a whole community are knowing these tools, talking about these tools, and then role modeling it for the kids, and then formally teaching it to the students. And so, it's all school staff typically. So it's a whole community of people that kind of go next level in terms of being higher brain. Sorry.
No, it's all right. No, that's really cool. So is it possible that the Leo Project could solve the problems of anxiety nationwide?
I mean, so, I think it's important not to be, go all or none, but the evidence is that a large percentage of people are able to make substantial reductions in anxiety. So, again, look at using the sort of continuum 0 to 100. If you go from a 30 to now you're a 60, it means you'll still kind of 50 being the cutoff between higher brain and lower brain. Mm-hmm. You may still kind of every once in a while get triggered I certainly do. You get triggered by a situation and you go lower brain suddenly. So it doesn't mean you completely get rid of depression and anxiety and trauma, but for the most part, you're existing in the higher brain side. And so I think the vast majority, I'd say by our data, 5% of people are so traumatized. They're sensitives who have been traumatized by life. They've been really put into a self-protective defense, self-protective lower brain mode, and it's harder for them to shake out of it. Even then, we say just learn a couple tools to shut off the lower brain, a couple tools to activate the higher brain, and then call it a day. You don't have to be a scientist of your brain because it's kind of scary for them to open this up given the trauma that they have. But I'd say 95 to 100% of groups of 30 to 100 say their approach to life and work has changed, and there's been big drops in anxiety and depression. So does it completely go away? Not necessarily.
Right.
For some it does. I think for 20-25% it goes away completely because they have a complete change in mentality about life. For 50 to 70%, it's going to be pretty much gone. And there'll be 5-10% that are still going to be struggling. And so, but they're going to be better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that if you just break that down into like a week, if you could tell me that instead of only feeling good one day of the week, I could feel good 4 or 5 days of the week.
Yes.
I think almost any person is going to take that.
Yes.
And then there'll be a couple people or, a few people that get to 7 out of 7.
Yep.
But if you could move from 0 or 1 to 3 or 4 or 5 to 6, Like that's a huge, I mean, I think anyone would take that deal.
That's even a better way to create an analogy than I did. I agree. That's a practical way to look at it. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of the scale of what's happening, because if the average reduction in anxiety is 50 to 70%, you can imagine that there's a large group that's almost 100%.
Yeah.
And there's a smaller group that's maybe not moving quite as much. The other interesting thing about the data, we looked at what we call as the low mood folks, which is the ones who are starting out really low in terms of anxiety, depression, et cetera, eating and energy problems. And we're like, oh, we'll see if they move, because they're so lower brain through no fault of their own, combination of biology and circumstances. And lo and behold, they moved even more. So it's like, wow, that was a big revelation. Like we're even more hopeful than before.
So that's awesome to hear that data. Where I was going, or where my mind was going there, was like, we're such a medicated society. You live in a Western medical world, being a practicing physician. So in no way, shape, or form are we going to sit here and say, hey, no medication is going to be new. My thought always goes to, have we tried everything that we possibly can before medication is instituted? And so, like, what are those activities? I know you and I just on our walk over here, talking about diet, cold immersion, hot and cold stuff, meditation, stuff of those nature. So I'm just spitballing here, but rather, could you give us some of the activities that we could all do to work towards the higher brain? Again, not saying taking anything away from people that need medication, because some might, but I'm always like, can I take a walk? Can I cool down? Can I get in ice immersion to reduce inflammation? Because we know inflammation is a killer in many different ways. So I'm just spitballing here. You tell us tell me where I'm going right, where I'm going wrong.
No, I think that's spot on. I think, why not, if you can, why not take advantage of the resources that you have internally and externally that are more sustainable? They don't cost as much. There aren't the side effects of medication. So it makes sense logically to try to, go with more holistic, natural approaches. Having said that, people who have severe anxiety and depression, we need to give them a break. We need to give them a bridge, give them a little bit of a gap where they can then bring in some of these. So if they're really in a bad place, I think it's important to use all the tools, including medication. So I want to be, really conscientious to my psychology and psychiatry and family practice friends who do this and need to prescribe those meds. So I think there's value there, but antidepressants haven't made depression go away, right? Depression's more massive than ever. So I think they're a bridge. They create a gap. Then you bring these tools in. So you're exactly right about that. I think diet has a big effect on whether you're higher brain or lower brain. I think these various activities that you can do, from yoga to breathing techniques, meditation, prayer, music, more exercise that makes you be more present, that you have to really pay attention. That tends to be a little bit more higher brain activating. So there's a whole host of tools that you can use to really make the higher brain come alive. And I think, and that includes diet. So absolutely, I think those are about 7 or 8 things right there. And so I think it's important. One of our big things that we teach is, it's overwhelming how much stuff is out there. I get that, right?
We're in the age of information. So
age of information, and everyone,
thinks they're an expert.
They do. They believe in their way of doing things. That's why our approach has been, we're agnostic. Like we're an aggregator. We want to keep gathering tools and give you insight into the various tools. But the bottom line, the science that matters, is the science of you. Science means cause and effect. That's all it means. And sometimes there's controversy about science, but it's cause and effect. So the science of you is, I try something, stick with it for 2 or 3 weeks. And if I notice some positive changes, signs of lower brain coming off, signs of higher brain coming on, great. Keep that in the toolkit. Now, what else can you add to the toolkit? And I think that's the way to have fun with this and not be overwhelmed with, I don't know what's the right thing to do. And I don't know if I can do it, if I can be successful. And don't worry about that stuff. Have fun, be playful about it, learn a tool, try it, see what happens. Works, great. Doesn't work, toss it out, try something else. Everyone's got a unique brain, unique history, unique biology of the body. So, that's where it's democratizing, it's empowering. You should be the scientist of you first and foremost.
Yeah. I'm glad you went there because it led right into my next question. I'm going to read this because I don't want to misquote you. You said before that if you take away hope, energy, and optimism, that's the recipe for depression. So I thought about the last couple of years when I re-listened to our podcast, and I think about COVID lockdowns. The media is telling us to be selectively enraged. And it doesn't matter what you believe.
Both sides
are doing that. So how do we combat depression and anxiety on it? And I think you just, the scientist piece is kind of what I wanted you to key on, and if there's anything else there. Because I'm sitting here thinking about being a listener, hearing this, and whether they're pissed off about what their government did and the shutdowns, or if they're pissed off about something entirely different, whether it's a Ukraine situation, whatever. You have all these inputs just firing at you, and none of them seem to be positive. How do we stay right in that moment and combat that anxiety and depression that's almost being forced upon us?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge question and a critical question. And, that's where I think you have to be selective. I'm not against any technology, social media, regular media, but they are sophisticated about brain science. And the reality is, and I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, but Nobel Prize winning studies show that loss avoidance is the prime motivator, not gain. And so negative news is more sticky in the brain. That is a fact. And so, they want, the media wants to get you to stick to them.
Eyeballs on their screen.
Eyeballs on their screens.
They want eyeballs on the screen because they can do what? Sell ad services.
Right.
Okay. Right. So that's their primary motivator. So just know that if you did not know that before. Sorry, go ahead and continue.
That's a huge clarification because, if they're getting you to be sticky to their platform based on negative information, there's a big conflict of interest because they need to trigger your lower brain to get you to stick to them to sell more product, if you will. So that's one thing. One way in which you need to protect yourself is you need to reduce your exposure to media and social media. Again, it doesn't mean that those can't be used for good. My daughter's a reporter for NBC. It's like, I think media and social media can be used for higher brain purposes, which is educating and connecting people and getting you informed about what some of the cool things that are happening in the community and drawing your attention to things that you were recently in a charity event, right? I mean, drawing attention to wonderful things like that. So I'm not against any technology, but I think we have to be very aware of whether it's used for a higher brain purpose or a lower brain purpose. And if it's making you go lower brain, create some separation. The other thing about your point is, really anxiety and then downstream from that stress. And that's the hope, energy, optimism thing that you referred to from our last podcast, is that when you have a lot of stress hormones being released, it disconnects the higher brain. What's so fascinating about this brain, and it's the coolest game in town, is there's a cosmic battle going on between lower brain and higher brain. Lower brain actually has the ability to disconnect the higher brain with the stress hormone cortisol. And higher brain has the ability with neural networks to be able to stabilize and shut off the lower brain. You have control over how higher brain you are. And so what happens with stress, every time you see something that's triggering for you, you release stress hormone, and then that causes you to disconnect the higher brain and amp up the lower brain. It's a double whammy that happens. And so it's really important for you to, separate from some of those triggers, recognize your ability to become more higher brain dominant, gain control back of your life. So what happens? What is anxiety? Anxiety is fear of the unknown. And there is so much unknown right now that we're anxious all the time. So how do you gain back a sense of control? Well, what our recipe and recommendation is, listen, you have, because of neuroplasticity, which means you can grow and shrink any part of your brain, you have the ability to become ever more higher brain dominant. That is a fact. Now, if you become higher brain dominant, it's the most meaningful thing you can do is to learn to be higher brain dominant. It's a beautiful thing that you created in this lifetime. If you teach other people how to do that, that's very purposeful. You're really making people come alive. Now, the third thing is, if you are higher brain dominant, you become more creatively fearless. You're not afraid of taking risks and failing and being rejected and losing. And so you become so iterative, entrepreneurial, in a social, in a business, in every way, that you become what we call self-efficacious. You're very effective at adapting. That's part of what's happening in the United States is our ability to adapt has gone down because it's the curse of our wealth and success as a nation. And I'm so grateful to be an American. And this platform has given me so much opportunity that it's heartbreaking to see how we're divided and struggling. But I want to give back because of everything I've been given. But we have the ability to be entrepreneurial like no other nation in the world, to be creative in schools, in service, in business products and services, in the arts, music, literature, anything you can think of. And so we still have access to that, but we're so shut down that we're afraid to take risks. Once we become higher brain, that third thing comes online. You can be creatively fearless. You become efficacious. You can adapt. We lost that adaptability ability as Americans because we were so wealthy and so dominant that we were coasting for a while. Now what's happening is that the world is equalizing with us economically and status-wise. And so dopamine levels are dropping. And we're like, I don't know if I can adapt to the future because the world is changing so fast and I don't have the comfort to be able to adapt. Self-efficacy. And so once you learn that by being more higher brain, then you're like, whatever happens, I can deal. Not a problem. I'll be fine. Anxiety goes way down because you're not worried about fear of the unknown. Because you're like, whatever happens, I know I can adapt because I don't have a problem looking stupid. I don't have a problem being embarrassed. I don't have a problem asking for help because I'm not worried about self-esteem brain, which we can talk about. I don't have a problem looking the fool. I just need to figure out what I need to do next.
Yeah.
And if I have a group of people that I can talk to and we can all talk to each other and help each other, you will be adaptable. You don't have to worry about the future. Don't let media freak you out about the future. Once you're higher brain dominant, teaching others, and you're adaptable, you're set for life. There's nothing to worry about. Anxiety comes down, 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 down. That was a lot of talking on my part. Sorry.
There's so much there. I'm sitting there chomping at the bit because I think not only was it complacency on the part of Americans because we were so successful, but I think there's also an element that our current politicians, and this is bipartisan, are kind of preaching the message that we were to be average. And whereas excellence in Eastern world, like you mentioned, is being talked about as a good thing. Here, we're seeing that rich people are bad. Rich people don't pay their taxes, all this different stuff, which isn't true at all. Might be true for a minute amount, but by and large, all the rich people I know are good people, giving to charity, giving of their time, saving lives. So it's just interesting to me to think it's not just, I think it's our responsibility to be successful and to get into that upper brain. Because as you do, you're going to be able to lift others up.
Absolutely. I haven't thought about this for a while, but I think, the reason, I really love the idea of, us as, we as a nation, and there's interesting genes to show regardless of your ethnic group, Americans have a very common quality, which is we are what we call dopamine insensitive. We are very restless souls that come to this country for the last 250 years, including recent immigrant ethnicities like mine. That my father came here in 57, right? So we're more recent. There's a restlessness, there's a pioneer spirit, there's a desire to discover and try new things, and that's our genius as a nation. Now, it does also, that same quality can lead to a little bit of selfishness.
Yeah.
But the good news is you can shut that part of your brain off once you understand it, and what's left over is what you said, is innovate, try new things, see what works, what doesn't work. This is the greatest platform for innovation in the world by far. And so, yes, I have, a physician, which is a kind of a traditional path, but then I became an entrepreneur in a sense over the last decade. I have so much respect for entrepreneurs because you really have to become strong to tolerate constant failure and rejection to succeed. And so,
and especially by the people that are closest to you.
Yeah.
That's the craziest part, is your family and friends will hate against you first.
Yeah. Are you sure you should do that?
Like,
why are you doing this?
No,
why are
just go get a job.
Yeah.
Just go get a safe job.
Right.
And then they won't buy your product, or they won't come to your store, but strangers will. So that's the toughness part that you just, I had to chime in there, because it's crazy. Like, if you realize this, and if you're a new entrepreneur going through this right now, where family and friends aren't supporting you, that's typical. Become a raving success, and then they'll come back around.
But also, here's a way to do it in a sustainable way, right? If you're in love with creativity and building things and learning and growing, you'll be a lot less stressed. Where being an entrepreneur becomes a little bit stressful is that if you haven't sorted out your why in a sustainable way, it's really more about the money and the validation and the fame. The problem is that doesn't sustain, and there's a lot of stress when things aren't working out. And then you start to become inhibited. You become less creatively fearless. Maximum happiness goes way down. So I think it's important to remember, to me, the power of being creative and being entrepreneurial is it's a platform for joy, but it's also a platform for becoming higher brain dominant. It's a platform for teaching character. It's to be entrepreneurial and to be creatively fearless. Entrepreneurial, I mean, in a broad sense, socially entrepreneurial, business in all kinds of ways, to be innovative and to be scientific about measuring what's working and not working. That platform is such a great platform for character and strength building, and you get to keep that. Teaching other people how to be strong and have character, they get to keep that. And to be creatively joyful, you get to be that way all the time. So having, like you said, having the right why of being an entrepreneur. And the funny thing is, you'll be more successful if you're motivated by the joy of it and the power and the challenge of it, because then you're not afraid of a bad outcome. So you're more likely to take greater risk, be more honest about what's working and not working, fail fast, as they say in Silicon Valley. So paradoxically, you will be more successful if you're not primarily focused by the big outcome. You know, that's secondary. That takes care of itself.
Yeah. So the why behind that is, again, why I'm seeing that. And it has to be more of a selfless why than a selfish why.
What's funny is, it's the most selfish thing you can do is to be selfless. Once you get your ego and your self-esteem and your FOMO brain, they're all dopamine systems, out of the way, your higher brain high that comes on from being entrepreneurial is so much richer. It's a whole host of neurochemicals that I kind of rattled off before: serotonin, GABA, dopamine, etc. All those things. And so the funny thing is, when you say, you're right, selfless, the selfish part of our brain really sabotages us. That's the lower brain that we talk about. It's the self-esteem dopamine system. It's the FOMO dopamine system. And a lot of us are motivated by that. And it leads to some degree of success and some degree of character. So it's better than sitting on the couch. But it's not as sustainable, because it also comes along with a lot of stress and a lot of disengagement. You have some success and you're like, I want to hold on to this success. I don't want to take any more risk.
Yeah.
And now you're getting narrower and narrower in your life, and you're getting bored, you're getting depressed, you're getting addicted. So I think like you said, the why, when it's really focused on, the bigger picture of creating something beautiful processes, beautiful neural networks of skill and understanding, beautiful social networks, that you're creating, that bigger why is more sustainable. And you take the pressure off yourself in terms of success and failure for identity. You can actually be more successul.
That's really cool. Where does FOMO come from? Oh, for those that may not know that acronym, they have to be probably 60 plus years old. The fear of missing out.
Yeah.
Where does that come from?
Well, I think socially it's become big. Social media, people are talking about FOMO all the time because, everyone's putting their best lives on there, which we know is not true. And so it's like everyone's having vacation all the time. Everyone's going to the best restaurants all the time. It's like, so your lower brain's like, wait a minute, are we doing the right thing with our lives? Maybe we should be doing what they're doing instead of what we're doing, sitting here working on a desk, or working, 15 hours a day. And I think where it comes from a brain science perspective, it's that same dopamine system. The lower brain is designed to, give you rewards of dopamine and take away dopamine, and giveth and taketh away, in order to manipulate you to have higher social rank, Higher social rank means mating success. Mating success leads to more kids. Genes get passed on to the next generation, and your genes say, thanks, buddy. We're on to the next generation. We're going to survive. We don't care about your body anymore. You can go wherever, right? So the dopamine system is really a lower brain manipulation system to get you to be more higher ranking in your society and in your organization, and to get more pleasure and opportunity, because that's like lower brain's like, hey, more novel experiences, more pleasure equals more potential mating advantage. So we want more of that. And so if someone else is getting more than we are and we're losing out on opportunity, we were going to get into this restaurant, really awesome restaurant, 15-minute wait, and then suddenly it's 30 minutes, 45 minutes. You're looking, the VIP group goes right by you, gets into the restaurant before you do. You're steaming. That's your lower brain dropping your dopamine levels on purpose and saying, listen, I gave you a prepayment of dopamine because we're really excited about this outcome. And now this outcome's not happening. And I'm going to make you pay a price until you fix this situation, buddy. This is how the lower brain has us controlled.
That's such a powerful example because first of all, I can see myself in that scenario, but also it's in that moment, if you take a step back, you're like, well, why am I even pissed? It's status, ego. Those people get in before I do. Why am I not as important as them? Like, it's all ego, status driven, right? And lower brain, like you said.
So that's one thing that's very powerful. Exactly. That's one of the brain hacks we teach, which is false story, which is, listen, this is a dopamine trick of the lower brain. Let's let go of that. Now, sometimes that doesn't work. But what replaces that addiction, it's like an addiction, is replace it with a different high. A different high is, in this moment, I can be as creative as I want. I can be creative about relationships. Here I am talking to you and I'm standing in line. Why don't I go deep and start talking about things that are really deep and thoughtful, meaningful, and maybe even have a difficult conversation? Why can't I start talking about new ideas and thinking about my products and services and what have you? And what are some other ideas I want to capture? Why can't I brainstorm? Why can't I use this as an opportunity? Yes, I am triggered. I am lower brain right now. Very interesting. I wonder why that's happening. What is the story that my brain's telling? Can I step outside of it? Can I use a brain hack for the higher brain or a brain hack for the lower brain? That you're building power actually over your lower brain. So you're actually taking or standing in a traffic jam or what have you. You can flip on a podcast. You can get on a phone call. You can be productive everywhere all the time. So there is a different high that you can tap into, but we forget that we can do that.
Yeah. By the way, yesterday I posted on my story. It was just a great quote. It wasn't mine. I stole it and reposted it. That says, I'm triggered, right? I am triggered is a cop-out. I am triggered is stating that you are not emotionally mature to handle your own thoughts and emotions, and you're passing that responsibility on to the rest of us.
That's a really interesting point, and I wouldn't necessarily use the term "you're not mature enough" because I think when you make broad characterizations,
emotionally mature enough,
in that moment, you went into an immature place, right? It's a lower brain place because I think when we use those broader labels, it can shut people down and they feel defensive and they feel like they're a bad person. I think it's important for us not to think in broad strokes, all or none, about people. But I think you're right. I mean. I'm triggered. I think it's important, and this is, I think Stephen Covey talked about, responsibility, right? Coming back all the way to 7 Habits, responsibility, and, this is before he knew about higher brain and lower brain and all these brain dynamics, but it's true, just saying I'm triggered is displacing blame and responsibility to somebody else. But when you take responsibility for everything, all pain, all discomfort, all disappointments, and say, okay, I own this. I got triggered by the situation, but why am I allowing myself to stay lower brain? What can I do to pull myself out of lower brain to higher brain? In the future, when that trigger shows up, can I create a new neural network that comes in and intercepts that trigger so it doesn't go to my lower brain? That's my responsibility. With neuroplasticity, I have no limit to how much I can create new neural networks to intercept the things that are very, triggers and vulnerabilities for me. So I think that's the height of power. Yeah. The reason you want to have people take responsibility for the triggers rather than saying, you triggered me, to say, I got triggered. This is my reaction. I take responsibility because now I become more powerful. I become more self-aware. I create new neural networks. I add to my catalog of what are my triggers?
Yeah.
What are my signs of being triggered? What are my neural networks that I'm going to burn into my brain? So the next time that trigger shows up, I'm going to divert it away to the higher brain. Or if I do get triggered, what are my neural networks that are going to pull me out of the lower brain into the higher brain? And that allows you to become more and more powerful by taking responsibility.
Right. Yeah. And the other point of that is like the likelihood of you changing that person that triggered you is slim to none. But you can have full control over changing yourself based on what you're just talking about.
That's a huge point. And I think it also connects to that anxiety point, right? I think anxiety, fear of the unknown is when you feel a loss of control. But when you feel like you have full control over your brain and your body and your relationships and your community, you don't have to worry about the unknown and the future because you have such good control over yourself and your relationships and your community that you can adapt. And so I think that also connects to that idea that you really want to put the focus on building power, focusing on things that you can control. You can't change the world. That's why this idea, sometimes we want to kind of stop the world from changing, and because it's causing anxiety. It's a trigger that's causing anxiety. You can't stop the world from changing. It's on this acceleration path. The amount of knowledge that's being generated now, the number of countries that are equalizing with us in terms of productive capacity and intellectual property. So you can't stop the world from changing. And so the one thing, like you said, the one thing you can control is how powerful you are as a human being. And that's infinite, how powerful you can become.
But what you just said there is really powerful. It is infinite how powerful you can become. And we are told and conditioned to believe that's not true.
That's exactly right. People are like, oh, I don't have the talent, or I'm not smart enough. And it turns out talent and intelligence as a predictor of greatness in any field is gone. That's been disproven. Why? Because we now know that your genius in any field, it can be being a janitor, it can be being a nurse, a doctor, a CEO, whatever, business, an entrepreneur. It's all neural networks. Your density of knowledge, models of understanding of your field, skills are all neural networks, and you can grow them till the day you die. And so it makes sense that we now have proven that it's time put in and how much feedback you can tolerate are the keys to becoming a genius of anything. And so, I think it's really important to de-emphasize, because the lower brain loves excuses. I'm not smart enough. I'm not talented enough.
I don't have the right genes.
I don't have the right genes. So that way, we don't have to take risk.
Yeah.
We're out of here, right? It's because it doesn't want that dopamine level to drop. It doesn't want our status to drop.
Yeah.
We have to override that and say, I can be virtually anything I want. Is my why, my motivation strong enough to sustain me through the bumps and bruises that are going to come along with the feedback and the time and the sacrifice? You have to sacrifice time. There's FOMO. You have to sacrifice dignity with feedback. There's a self-esteem brain dopamine system pounding at you. What are you doing? Yeah. What are you doing? Stop this, craziness. So I think, I don't know if that addressed.
It's awesome. So 10,000 hour rule,
yes.
Malcolm Gladwell referenced in Outliers, plus the feedback loop.
Yes. And Anders Ericsson is the one who discovered both elements. Malcolm Gladwell popularized it. But Anders Ericsson discovered that it was the time, but even more importantly is something called deliberate practice, which is how do you practice? Are you practicing in a way? Are you scientific? You want to be a scientist saying, when I'm trying something, I'm getting better. But you also want to be a scientist of your practice itself. Is that practice actually helping move the ball for, on your skill advancement, your knowledge advancement, your understanding advancement, all those three things.
Your practice needs more practice.
Yeah. You need to be scientific. My friend Scott Struckenbach, who has been an inspiration to me, he used to always say, practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect, right? So he was right. And this is before the science even came out. So it's like, you do have to think about how you're practicing. Are you getting the right feedback? Are you getting the right metrics? Are you getting the right coaching to really, like Jack Nicholson and A Few Good Men, you can't handle the truth. That's it. It's true. Our self-esteem brain stops us from handling the truth, but the truth shall set you free, right? So you need to get feedback on what's actually working, what's actually not working. Can you handle that truth? That's going to allow you to grow and learn faster, build products faster that really work with the customer versus some idea you have and you want to hold on to that fantasy, but it's not really, when the rubber hits the road, it's not really getting traction. Why? How do you break that down? How much feedback can you take? That's why Silicon Valley is so, successful, because they are very agile and they can iterate, but we can all learn to be that way.
Yeah. Every individual, every human
Absolutely.
being. That's what he's saying. So I told you all you were in for a treat today. This was a lot of fun, as it always is. What I want to also talk about is Dr. Raj and I are working on some great programs and retreats. And if you have interest in that, at this time, you can go to joshkosnick.com to find out more about that, or reach out to us. We'd be happy to discuss we got some exciting stuff in the happenings real shortly here. So want you to be privy to that. And also, how can everyone follow you in the Leo program?
Yeah, it's just leoprogram.com. So it's LEO program, one word, .com. And we have a book now, and you can send us a message. We do workshops on demand. And so we're happy to set those up. And I'm thrilled with our partnership. You've become a really good friend. I really appreciate your openness to feedback and your willingness to try new things. And it's been an amazing partnership. So we're going to keep iterating until we make this leadership retreat magical. And I'm sure we're going to get there, because we don't have a problem learning and adapting. So I'm so thankful for your passion and enthusiasm and curiosity and agility. So thank you.
Or keep being agile.
Yeah, absolutely.
We got to keep getting better to help you get better. So we will do that. So everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And actually, I know you did. And share it, because we don't run ads. So please share the episode. We run by word of mouth. Remember, the good and great are the enemies of possible. Lead like a Spartan today.